life is never going to turn out the way we think, right? Things just happen. But I have found that sometimes it can be more beautiful, even if it's really messy and really hurtful. You can still find beauty in all of that.
Welcome to the Happiness and Progress podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Craig. I'm an Emmy Award-winning journalist, international speaker, mom, wife, and you know what I like to say, just a person looking for more joy in the everyday. This is a space where you belong, not because you earned it, not because of your title, your paycheck, or number of kids you have, but just because you are human and you are good. Here we explore progress over perfection, emotional and spiritual wellness, and how to relish the good parts of life that coexist with the not so good parts. This is Happiness in Progress. I'm so glad you're here today. Before we get started, I want to give a shout out to my first Patreon subscriber. Drum roll. This is a really exciting moment. Is one Jaylene Wood. And if you don't know, that is my mom. So Mom, thanks for leading the way and being one of my biggest fans since the day I was born. So thanks to my mom for subscribing and leading the way. Remember, if you subscribe to my Patreon, you do get a monthly virtual workbook that coincides with the theme on the podcast that month. All right, let's get to the good stuff. Although that was pretty good. Thanks, Mom. Today, I get to introduce you to one of my really good friends, Stephanie Hirtle. Stephanie practices self-compassion every single day as her life and motherhood don't really look exactly how she thought they would. She is a stay-at-home mom of 4 kids ranging in age from 12 to 25. She has a degree in American Studies and Business Management. Stephanie has been struggling with pain for the last 13 years. Through a variety of treatments, she's at a more manageable level, she says, but still struggles with pain every day. In this conversation, she's going to talk about the impact of chronic pain in every single part of her life. We'll also talk about tangible tools she's learned to offer herself more self-compassion, how to give herself grace even when the people around her are not, and how much she has learned from this experience and how she's refocused what success means. Let's get to it. Hi, Stephanie. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Hi, Danielle. Thanks for having me.
So I have wanted to talk to you for a long time. Maybe a year or two ago, you came to me. It must have been longer than that because the pandemic just did a weird warp thing with time. Anyway.
During COVID. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you came to me and you told me that dealing with health issues, you've learned a lot. And I really wanted to come back around and have you share some of what you've learned as you've dealt with this. And so let's just start with that. Tell me a little bit about some of these health issues that you've been facing.
Okay. Well, it started about 13 years ago. I had a difficult pregnancy, a lot of complications, and I had severe pelvic pain because of the pregnancy. And it started early on and it got worse progressively. And I had to be in and out of the hospital. I had to be on really strong pain medication, which, I tried to take as low as possible because I was pregnant. And then finally at 36 weeks, I just begged my doctor to do something. And he stripped my membranes, even which that's kind of against protocol. But anyway, he did that and I prayed. And the next day I went into labor, thank goodness.
Wow.
But unfortunately, since then, that has not been the end of my pain. So I have been struggling with pain since then for 13 years. And I'm at a much more manageable place right now, but I have pain every day.
Oh my gosh. Did they give a name to this or?
Yeah, I have a lot of things going on. So that was due to adenomyosis, which is like endometriosis. So I had hysterectomy. But I've had a lot of other issues too. I have tears, I have pelvic congestion syndrome, I have arthritis. They keep finding things and correcting them. So I've had a lot of treatments over the years, like surgeries and physical therapy. So I mean, I'm in a much better place than I am now, but not pain-free yet. Working towards that. Yeah.
How has this impacted your life? Impacted maybe even what you thought life would be like?
Well, it's interesting because, I was a gymnast growing up and I had a really high pain threshold.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I competed on a tour rotator cuff my senior year of
Oh my
gymnastics.
gosh.
Yeah, without even an ibuprofen, So pain is something I thought I would never have to deal with. And, I think a lot of the trials I've had in my life are trials I thought I would never deal with. So it's kind of interesting that way.
I think a lot of people, I think I could say the same thing.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. And I just like, don't, just think about every trial and hopefully you won't be surprised, right?
Yeah, right.
Anyway, but I think, I was such a go-getter. I was very goal-oriented. I was very driven. And even as an at-home mom, I still was very driven with my kids and having them involved in a lot of things and, doing a lot with my church and with other projects I was doing. I was always busy. And once you start dealing with chronic pain or chronic illness, that all goes away. So you have to learn a new normal. And one thing that my therapist taught me that helped a lot is she talks about the spoon, the spoon metaphor. And basically what it means, like pre-pain, Stephanie had let's say 100 spoons each day, and she could divvy those out, between all her different projects, everything she was doing. But post-pain Stephanie maybe had 20 a day, or maybe 5 a day, maybe 30 a day on a good day. And so you kind of have to learn how to divvy out each spoon and what's really worth it to you that day. Some days I could brush my teeth and brush my hair, and that's about it. Other days I could do more than that. But I had to learn that that was okay. That's my new normal, and that's okay. And that was really hard because I felt like I wasn't accomplishing much in my life anymore.
Right. And I feel like we're a lot alike where we're this A-type personality. We like to have our hands in a lot of different things. And so I can only imagine how difficult that has been. What helped? You shared the spoon metaphor. What else helped with your perspective and mindset in that time?
Well, it was interesting. I think we all deal with, those of us who are mothers, we all deal with mom guilt, right? That's just a real thing we all deal with. And mine was that I couldn't be physically active with my kids the way I used to be. We used to go hiking, we used to do all these physical activities, and I had to really slow down on all of those things. And I remember my son was 3. He's like, "Why are you boring now, Mom?" So, he just wasn't used to me being like that. And my youngest, this is the only way she's ever known me. So at least my 2 older girls remember how I used to be. But I just learned that, what is most important is not so much what you do with your kids, but that the qualities that you're helping them develop. And my therapist said, "Are your kids compassionate? Are your kids empathetic? Are they aware of others? Are they unselfish?" And I thought, you know what? I didn't realize how much they were learning through this whole process. And perhaps these were attributes that were best learned in this way. And so that just put a whole different perspective on my mom guilt. And it's not so much that the things I had to cancel or things I couldn't do with them, but it was more about what I was helping them to become.
That's really beautiful. And when I think of your kids, I think of I said little, they're not little anymore. But I think of compassionate people. And I know that your youngest has been compassionate with you as you've gone through this. What have they taught you about compassion toward yourself?
I feel like, I remember when my oldest, she served a mission for our church. And when this all started, she was 13. And my husband was in medical school at the time, and I was young women. I was a president in our church, which was a lot of time. And I just felt like she had to really step it up at 13 years old and kind of be a second mother. And I just felt so guilty about that. And I emailed her about that, and I said, I just feel terrible that you at 13 years old you had to step up and be a second mom. And she said, "Mom, I don't feel that way at all. I felt I learned things that I would have not learned otherwise." And so I think that they've helped me to see that I don't need to be so hard on myself. I feel like when we talk to ourselves, I can be so hard on myself and say things that I would never say to another person. And so I have to really check myself. What I say to my friend, my goodness, your poor kids, they have to do so much because of your health. And, what are you trying to accomplish from this? No, I would say, look at these kids that you're raising, look at the attributes that they have. And I feel like, especially kids nowadays, it's so easy for them to kind of be a little more self-absorbed. And especially, in our social media, none of my kids are into that. They don't really get validation from social media. And I think a big part of it is because of what they've learned dealing with my issues.
Mm-hmm. I really love this idea about asking yourself, like, would I say this to my friend?
Yeah.
And it's interesting because so much of it just lives inside our heads, and we can just cycle on that negative stuff that we just beat ourselves up with. And we don't often enough check ourselves. So and I think it's normal, especially we're hard on ourselves, and those thoughts are going to come in no matter how much we've worked on it. But what are some of the things in the moment that you do to be like, to get back on the right track?
A lot of it for me has just been connection with people. One of the things about when you deal with chronic pain or chronic illness, it's different than, like, say, if you're dealing with cancer or something like that. We all know there's a lot of stigma attached with chronic pain. My husband's a doctor, and so I get why the stigma is there. And so it's not only are you dealing with the pain, but you're dealing with layers of stigma. And there have been times where people have been very cruel to me over the years and have said very unkind things to me. And, it can be really easy to just feel lonely and kind of isolate yourself. But that's the worst thing you can do. And so I have my support group. I have my two sisters, I have my daughters, I have people that I can call and talk to on my hard days. And literally that's what helps me get through those times is their support. There's a thing known as compassion fatigue, and it happens to all of the people in your circle. At times they're just going to get tired of what you're dealing with. And even though you try and not talk about it all the time, it does come up. And so I found that if I expand my circle, that helps. And the more vulnerable I am with people, the more connection I feel and the more they're willing to open up to me. And that has helped a lot.
And you create a safe space for them as well.
Exactly. Yes.
What do you think you have learned about self-compassion through this journey?
Well, as I said, one of the hardest things is feeling judged. And something that has really helped me, I saw this quote that usually when people are judging someone, it's because something is unhealed inside of them. And so they're projecting. So it's more about them and not you. Because it's really hard. I've found out a few times that friends that I thought were my friends were gossiping about me and saying unkind things. But I've had to learn that, that's on them. And this is more about their projection and not on me. I know what the truth is. I know what I struggle with. I know my life. They don't know my life and they don't understand. So a lot of it is just giving yourself grace to be forgiving to people who are unkind, and also giving grace to yourself that it's not so much about how I used to define success, which was how many goals I accomplished or all the great things I was doing. Now my success is about growth. Where am I growing? What qualities am I developing? And that's completely changed my perspective.
I have been dealing with this. People in my circle talking about me for things that are, medical things that are out of my hands. And that's really, really isolating. Like that alone is really, really isolating. You mentioned the forgiveness, which is really, really hard. There's probably need to be some boundaries up there. Forgiveness doesn't mean that you're going to open up still to them.
Or that you need to continue the relationship either, right?
Right, for sure.
Yeah.
What are some things, because I'm sure it's not just me and you sitting here that have had to deal with this.
Yeah.
What are some things that have helped you in that area?
My therapist said, she gave me a Post-it note and she said, I want you to write down the people in your circle that you trust. And these are the people that you feel like you can be completely vulnerable with. These are the people that only want good things for you. And honestly, it was like 4 or 5 people. And I think sometimes we feel like so many people, we try to feel like they need to be just as understanding as everybody else. But I think if you just kind of focus on your few, the ones that are really important to you, what the others say, it doesn't matter as much what other people say, because you're just focused on the few that you know really love you. And a lot of the times too is that I think, well, is this somebody that I really respect and admire? And sometimes, I'm not sure why I'm caring so much, because it's not really it's somebody who's been unkind to me. So why am I caring so much about what they think? So I think it's really about focusing in on those who are really your people. And it should be a small group. Doesn't need to be a huge group. And I also say, therapy is a great thing. Support groups, anywhere that you can feel safe talking about what you're struggling with and not worried that people are going to judge you.
Some of those support groups you can find on Facebook. You just have to be careful, because sometimes you get in a Facebook group with people who are going through the exact same thing, but they are also mean. So I don't know what that's about, but you can have success with that, but also just go into it knowing that you don't know who these people are yet.
Right. And sometimes they focus on only the negative, and that pulls me down. So you need to be in a group that you can talk about it, but also be positive about it.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. Brene Brown says to make the box 1 inch by 1 inch. And then inside that box, that's even smaller than a Post-it note.
That is small.
That box, you write the people's names of opinions that are going to matter to you, and that you are going to be vulnerable with. And it's all about that vulnerability. And you don't have to bring all those people outside that box into there. And I think that's important. And I think I also thought about, it's so funny because also what Brene Brown talks about is belonging. And I think that's why we care so much, is because we want to have that feeling of belonging.
Yeah. And, when I first moved to the area I live now, it was really hard to connect with the women here because, most of them are go-getters. The ones I know, they exercise a lot, they volunteer, they're going in a million directions. And it was really hard for me to find, make those connections. And so sometimes you have to try a little harder. And I just realized that I'd rather try harder and put more of myself out there than just be lonely and isolated. So you do have to put forth a little more effort if you're not seeing people throughout your, just normal activities in the day. But I find that I get really down when I just cut myself off.
Yeah, I agree. I think that connection is a big thing. You talked about the spoons earlier, and you said, maybe there was a day that your spoon would be like, you have a couple spoons and you can only like get dressed and do laundry or whatever your examples were. Do you celebrate those wins on those days?
I wish I was better at that. Sometimes I just white knuckle it through a day, honestly.
Yeah.
But I think that's okay. I think that's okay to do once in a while. As long as we don't stay in that. But yeah, and if I'm able, some days that's more than I thought I could do, was shower, and there've been days where I have not showered, but maybe I talked to my daughter that day. Maybe I talked to a friend. Maybe I listened to a really good podcast. So I think you just kind of have to broaden what the spoons are, what the spoons can represent in your life. It's not just about things you're doing. It's things that you're becoming.
What do you think that this experience has helped you become?
Wow. I can't really imagine my life without this, because it's been so transformational. And, I'm a Christian. And so I've relied on my faith a lot. And I think during these times, I think it's always good to have some kind of higher power or some kind of something that you can lean and support upon. Because sometimes that's the only thing you have to lean on that day. And what I have found is it's transformational when you're able to get out of yourself and learn what's really important. And I've just learned that, yeah, I can't go backpacking with my kids, or I can't do all this hiking with my husband, but I know my kids will tell me anything and everything. They feel comfortable to do that. And I'm grateful for the times they just sat on my bed and talked to me, and that was all we did. But that was enough, and that was what they needed. And maybe if I'd been really busy and been doing a lot of things, maybe I wouldn't have had time to just sit on my bed and talk to them. And so I think it's made me a better mother, even though it wasn't the kind of mother I thought I was going to be. I actually think that I'm a better mother because I feel more connected to my children, and a better spouse. So I think, life is never going to turn out the way we think, right? Things just happen. But I have found that sometimes it can be more beautiful, even if it's really messy and really hurtful. You can still find beauty in all of that.
Mm-hmm. When I know you said you're in a good place now, on those hard days, are you able to remember this? Like you said, you're white knuckling it through the day. Are you able to have the perspective on that day? Or is it like, let me just get through this day and I'll deal with perspective another day?
Yeah. I mean, those days are hard. I
Yeah.
will, they're really hard, but I try to keep in mind that this is just today. It's going to be better tomorrow. And one thing I hadn't talked about yet is, a few years ago, I started developing depression because of the chronic pain. And, those tend to go hand in hand, right? But I got to a really dark place with depression. And some days, honestly, I would rather be in pain than depressed. I think it's so much worse.
Mm.
It's just this blackness just kind of consumed you. And on those days, I just kept telling myself, this is gonna go away. Just hang in there. This is gonna go away. And that's what I try and do on those really bad days, my bad pain days, or luckily my depression, I'm doing much better with that. But in the past, I would just try and keep in mind that it's okay. You're gonna get through it. This is gonna go away, and to just hang in there as best as you can, and not like be in survival mode, but just understand that this isn't going to last forever. It's going to be okay.
But man, it has been a hard few years for everyone. And so many of the things we've talked about, even if someone listening hasn't been dealing with chronic pain or a chronic medical issue, they, isolation. We've all felt a lot of isolation, and a lot of people have dealt with depression in this isolation.
Right.
Has there been any tool or anything else that you've learned that has helped you that you think might help someone listening?
So something that's been very cathartic for me is writing. That's how I like to deal with hard emotions. Is I like to write about it. I like to write what I'm learning, what I'm growing. And so I think it's good to have some kind of creative outlet, even when you're depressed. And sometimes you just have to fake it a little bit. And even if you don't really feel like whatever it is, art, writing, music, whatever it is, I think it's really important that you use your abilities to create. I think there's a lot of power in being creative and creating. And so there have been really dark days where I just start writing, and maybe I'm just writing about how terrible I feel, right? Or how dark everything is. But I find that as I write, I go through a catharsis, and it lends to light, is what I've found, is that the darkness will become light as I write and express myself and dig into those hard emotions instead of just trying to ignore them.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Mm-hmm. I think that's where my creativity lies, is the writing. So I'm right there with you in how powerful that can be.
Yeah.
What would you tell your past you about how strong you are?
If I had to go back in time and talk to myself, then wow, I wouldn't even know how to prepare myself for what was coming. Because honestly, it's been the hardest experience of my life. But I would just say, extend yourself a lot of grace, extend yourself a lot of compassion. It's going to be hard. So find your people, find the people that really matter to you and that are worth sharing this struggle with. Because some people, honestly, it's probably just not worth sharing with them. And it's the people, on that 1 inch by 1 inch square. And understand that you're going to get through it and you're going to be okay. But just remember that growth comes in usually hard ways, right? Growth is usually not found in a comfort zone. And so the way I was going to grow is to be uncomfortable and, not just uncomfortable, but a lot of pain. And I like to say that pain's been my greatest teacher. Physical pain, I've experienced spiritual pain, emotional pain, mental pain. They've all taught me in ways that I don't think anything else can. And so I would just tell myself, focus on the growth, focus on what you're learning, focus on your people, and you're going to be okay.
I think that's really powerful. And I think anyone listening can learn from that. And I really, really hate that we grow from pain.
I know. There be another way.
There's got to be another way. Like maybe we can, I don't know, have a brunch and grow a lot in that brunch with your girlfriends.
Exactly. That sounds a lot better to me.
Has there been anything else you've been thinking about as you kind of been preparing to kind of talk a little bit about compassion that you think that you've learned that could help someone?
Especially as women, I think we tend to be harder on ourselves and, we tend to pull ourselves in a billion different directions and, pride ourselves on multitasking and just being busy all the time. I think it shouldn't take pain to make us slow down. We should just choose to slow down. I think we're missing a lot in those connections with our spouse, our children, our friends, when we're just busy all the time. And so when we can learn to just slow down and make those connections and, reach out even when we feel like we want to be alone, but we know that that's not good for us. We really need connection in our life. And that's what I've just come to know so much is that it's all about connection. And I think that's why, the pandemic was so hard is because we lost a lot of that connection. And I think that's why a lot of kids struggle today because they're finding their connection online in kind of artificial ways. There's no substitute for real connection. And so we just need to take time to slow down and really connect with the people we love.
I started a job and my whole past has been news, and in news there's just like you go and you go and you go and you go. And I was in a meeting at this new job and I'm like going, and they're like, this isn't news. Can you stop? We need to talk and connect for a minute.
I love it. I bet that was hard to do. It's a big change.
Yeah, well, it's a learned behavior.
It's true.
I like to. Oh wait, no, say.
I was going to say, I think we feel like, well, at least me, I feel like I'm more important. I'm doing more when my life is busier, right?
The badge of honor.
Exactly.
And that again is also learned in our culture, and it's something we have to unlearn and grow out of. I like to ask everybody, what is your number one tip for finding more joy in the good, the bad, and the in-between?
It's finding beauty in the bad and the ugly. Finding beauty in everything. It's easy to find beauty in the good, right? That's really easy to do. But finding beauty in those things that are just messy, like I like to call myself a hot mess a lot. That's where the joy comes. When you find beauty in the flaws, when you find beauty in the imperfection, that is where you really find the beauty. And so much of our connection is being able to be vulnerable with each other. And, we don't need to show everything, but it's good to let people know that we're not perfect. It's good to let people know we have flaws. And we can I think it helps form connections when we're honest about ourselves with each other. And I think that just nothing bonds more than that when we're just honest about and authentic about who we really are.
Thank you so much for doing that very thing here on the podcast. I know it's a lot to ask someone to talk about the hardest thing they've had to go through in their life. And so I really appreciate that you shared that and the vulnerability and the things you've learned, because I already feel like I've learned a lot and I have some stuff that I can take as I move forward. And I'm excited to share that with the listeners.
Thank you, Danielle. I really appreciate you having me on. It's been a pleasure to be with you.
I hope you enjoyed hearing from Stephanie. You can find out how to follow her in my show notes. I really loved talking to her. I love every chance that I get to talk with her. Stephanie, thanks for coming on. And remember, if you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button.